Mike stood in the center of the most famous clothing store on Fifth Avenue, New York. He felt invincible, powerful. It was his first day as the manager, newly hired for the city's most luxurious brand. The setting was perfect, and he was ready to show off his skills and lead the store like a true leader. Mike took pride in his impeccable appearance, an expensive suit, branded watch, and a smug smile on his face. To him, the store was a stage, and he was the star actor. As he walked through the well-decorated aisles filled with high-end clothing, he already knew what he thought of his subordinates. They weren't up to his level of experience or elegance. They don't know what real work is, he thought, barely able to hide the disdain in his eyes. It was a busy afternoon, with customers coming in and out, voices blending with the background music, carefully curated to create a luxurious experience. Mike was watching everything closely, scrutinizing and evaluating. That's when he noticed a woman walking into the store. She looked out of place. She wore simple clothes, a worn-out wool coat, and shoes that had seen better days. Mike eyed her up and down and instantly made his judgment. A poor woman, he thought. She's probably lost or just killing time here. He wrinkled his nose in disgust. But as he saw the woman calmly walking through the aisles, touching the fabrics and observing the items, he decided to step in. With firm steps, he approached the woman, who seemed not to notice his presence. "Can I help you?" Mike asked, his voice dripping with arrogance and impatience. The woman looked up, her eyes kind but firm, and responded calmly, "Oh, I'm just looking around. Thank you." But for Mike, that response wasn't enough. He was determined to make it clear that this woman, with her humble clothes and worn shoes, didn't belong there. "Perhaps it would be better if you looked somewhere else. You know, here we sell branded clothes, very expensive items," he said, putting emphasis on the word expensive, as if trying to intimidate her. The woman held her gaze steady. Her eyes, though aged by time, held a serene, observant gleam. She didn't seem surprised by Mike's attitude, as if she was used to being judged by her appearance. Even so, she remained unfazed. "I just want to look around. I don't mind the prices." She responded calmly, continuing to look at the shelves around her. However, Mike was growing impatient. He didn't want his store to be contaminated by someone he saw as lower class. "Ma'am, I really need you to leave. It's not allowed for people like you to just browse without the intention of buying," he insisted, now in a harsher, more offensive tone. That cutting remark hung in the air. Other customers nearby stopped to watch the scene unfold. The woman was silent for a few seconds, just staring at Mike. But instead of arguing or raising her voice, she simply nodded. "All right, if that's what you want," she said calmly. And she turned to leave, walking with steady, calm steps, as if nothing could shake her composure. Mike, on the other hand, crossed his arms and let out a sigh of satisfaction. He believed he had done the right thing, that he had put that woman in her place. He even cast a look of disdain as she walked out the door. The store returned to its usual movement after the woman left. Mike, satisfied to have solved the problem, resumed his tasks with his typical demeanor, rigid, authoritarian, and controlling. He walked through the store, giving instructions to the staff. "Fold those clothes correctly. Look at how poorly arranged they are. You, keep an eye on the customers. I don't want anyone touching the clothes without intending to buy." He tolerated nothing less than perfection, or at least what he saw as perfection. His subordinates exchanged looks of exhaustion and fear. It was clear that to them, Mike was nothing but a tyrant. While Mike was paying attention to every detail, the sales manager, Sarah, a young, efficient, and polite woman, approached him hesitantly. "Mike, there's someone on line 2 wanting to speak with you. Sounds important." Mike huffed with irritation. "Another problem to solve. Who is it now?" he asked, not hiding his annoyed tone. "She didn't give her name, but she said she's someone special to the store," Sarah replied, frowning slightly. "Great, just what I needed. I'll handle it, thanks," Mike said as he headed to the back area of the store where the office was. Once there, he picked up the phone with an impatient expression and answered, "Mike speaking. How can I help?" On the other end of the line, the voice was calm and polished. "Hello, Mike. I hope I'm not interrupting, but I'd like to talk to you about a customer's experience in the store today." That tone of voice intrigued Mike. There was something familiar about it, but he couldn't quite place it. "Yes, of course. I'm here to help. he replied, trying to maintain his composure. Who am I speaking to, please? We'll get to that soon. First, I'd like you to tell me, Mike, about a specific customer who was there earlier. A woman, simple clothes. She just wanted to look at the items, and you sent her away. Is that right? The blood drained from Mike's face for a moment. How did this person know exactly what had happened? He couldn't understand. For a second, he even thought about lying or downplaying the incident, but something about the voice on the other end made him feel that it wouldn't work. Well, yes, there was a woman here. She wasn't the type of customer who would normally buy our products, so I thought it best to direct her elsewhere. On the other end of the line, the silence that followed was almost deafening. And then the voice spoke again, this time with a tone of disappointment. Interesting, Mike. And tell me, how do you know who our customers are? Can you judge just by looking at the clothes they wear? Mike, feeling increasingly uncomfortable, tried to justify himself. Look, I just need to maintain the store's standards, right? The woman didn't look like someone who could afford to buy here, and I thought I was doing my job. The voice responded, now more firmly. Your job is to treat all customers with respect and dignity, regardless of appearance. It's not your place to judge who deserves to be served in our store. Mike felt the sweat start to run down his forehead. He was no longer so sure of himself. This person knew a lot about the store, and he was beginning to suspect that she might be someone important, but he couldn't figure out who. I understand, Mike replied, swallowing hard. I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. If I had known that. Before he could finish the sentence, the voice on the other end interrupted. Oh, you will understand. Better than you imagine. By the way, Mike, I'm the owner's mother, and tomorrow I'll be there in person to discuss your behavior. Yet the ground seemed to disappear beneath Mike's feet. He turned pale, speechless, and the line went dead. The phone trembled in his hand as he tried to process what he had just heard. He had humiliated the mother of the store's owner. Mike slowly sat down in the office chair, his eyes vacant, his face as white as a sheet. The words echoed in his mind like thunder. The owner's mother. He shook his head, trying to gather his thoughts, but the feeling of being completely lost was overwhelming. How could this have happened? He, the perfect manager, had mistreated the wrong person, and now his career was at risk before it even began. His subordinates outside the office noticed something was wrong. Normally, he would be out there giving orders, criticizing everyone's work. But now, he was locked away, isolated. Sarah, the sales manager, knocked softly on the door. Mike, are you okay in there? He quickly stood up, adjusting his tie with trembling hands. Yes, everything's fine. I'm just dealing with something here. He tried to sound calm, but his voice betrayed his nerves. Get back to work, Sarah. I'm fine. Sarah nodded, but the expression on her face showed that she knew something was up. She walked away slowly, leaving Mike alone again with his thoughts. The rest of the day was a blur for him. Every customer who entered the store seemed like a threat. Every request from his colleagues felt like an unbearable interruption. Mike couldn't stop thinking about what would happen when the owner's mother showed up the next day. Had the news already reached the owner? Would he be fired in front of everyone? And what if there were some other kind of punishment? The uncertainty was torture. When the shift ended, he left without saying a word, leaving the other employees in doubt about what was going on. The streets of New York were as busy as ever, but to Mike, it felt like everything was in slow motion. He got into a cab, and as it passed through the city lights, his head was spinning. When he reached his apartment, he threw himself onto the couch, holding his head in his hands. He tried turning on the TV to distract himself, but nothing made sense. The world seemed to have lost its color. He picked up the phone several times, thinking of calling the store owner to apologize, to try to fix the mistake before it was too late. But his courage always failed him. How could he explain the arrogance with which he'd treated the owner's mother? What could he say to change the situation? It was a sleepless night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the woman from the store, the calm and steady expression with which she had endured his insults. And then he heard her voice on the phone, so firm and full of disappointment. Guilt and shame mixed with fear. He felt his skin burn at the memory of how he had acted. Idiot, He kept repeating to himself, "How could I have been such an idiot?" In the morning, he woke up with a start, realizing he had dozed off for just a few minutes. The New York sun was already shining through the window, and Mike felt the panic rising. Today was the day the owner's mother would appear. He needed to be there. He needed to prepare. He put on his suit in a rush, his hands shaking as he tried to adjust his tie. Every movement felt wrong. Every step felt like it weighed a ton. When he finally left his apartment, he walked like a condemned man heading to his final judgment. This can't be happening, he thought with every step down the sidewalk, a cold sweat trickling down his neck. When he arrived at the store, the atmosphere felt different. His colleagues seemed to be whispering to one another, throwing curious glances his way. Mike pretended not to notice, but he knew they had all sensed that something was wrong. He tried to act normally, just like every other day, but the tension was visible. The clock seemed to be racing too fast, and at the same time, each minute dragged on like an eternity. Around 10 a.m., the store's door opened, and Mike saw the woman walk in again. She stood there as simple and elegant as the first time. Only now, he knew who she was. She walked right up to him, her calm eyes and firm posture waiting for him to speak. "Ma'am, I can explain," Mike began to say, but the words seemed to get caught in his throat. He felt like he was shrinking, getting smaller with every second that she silently observed him, as if evaluating his every move, every expression. The entire store was holding its breath. Employees had stopped what they were doing, and the few customers present could feel the tension in the air. The woman looked around, observing the space as if she were taking in every detail. She seemed to have all the time in the world. Mike didn't know what to do. And deep down, he knew that whatever he said now wouldn't change what he had done. But he had to try. The air inside the store seemed to grow heavier, denser, as the woman slowly walked through the aisles, as if examining every detail. Mike followed a few steps behind, nervous and insecure, as her steady gaze drifted over every shelf, every mannequin, and finally returned directly to him. He opened his mouth several times to try to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. She said nothing, just looked at him with that penetrating, deep stare that seemed to say it all. And in that silence, Mike felt smaller, guiltier than he ever thought possible. Each second she stared at him, without uttering a single word, felt like slow, silent torture. He didn't know if he should beg for forgiveness, try to explain himself, or simply run away. The other employees pretended to work, but it was clear that they were all paying attention to the scene. Sarah, the sales manager, watched from afar with a tense expression. She knew something serious was happening, but had no idea who the woman was or why Mike seemed so shaken. Finally, the woman stopped right in the center of the store, beside a display table full of expensive handbags. She gently placed her hand on one of them and turned to Mike, who was now pale and trembling. She gave a soft smile, but it was a smile hiding a strength he had never faced before. "You know, Mike," she began, her soft voice cutting through the store's silence like a blade, "this store means a lot to me." Mike took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. I know, ma'am. And I'm sorry, I had no idea who you were. He tried to find the right words, but her expression indicated that no explanation would be enough. Every excuse sounded empty, fragile, like a leaf in the wind. She raised her hand slightly, interrupting him. "I'm not interested in your apologies, Mike. I want to understand why you think you can judge who deserves to come into this store." Those words hit Mike like a punch. He opened his mouth, but then closed it, not knowing how to respond. The truth was too painful to admit. He had judged the woman by her appearance, simply because of her clothes and simplicity. I was just trying to maintain the store's standards, you see?" He tried to justify, knowing he sounded ridiculous, pathetic. "Store standards?" she repeated, as if savoring the phrase. "And these standards, Mike, do they include mistreating people who you think don't have enough money to shop here?" She tilted her head slightly, waiting for a response that never came. Mike felt his face burn with shame. He looked around, trying to avoid the woman's penetrating gaze, but everywhere he looked, he only saw attentive faces, waiting for his reaction. What was once his confidence and arrogance had now become a pit of fear and shame. How could he have been so foolish, so arrogant? He knew that with every second that passed, the situation only got worse. but he was paralyzed, unable to undo the damage he'd done. The woman then approached one of the sales assistants who stood frozen behind the counter. "Dear, could you do me a favor?" she asked with a sweetness that seemed to be in total contrast to the tension in the room. The young woman, unsure how to react, just nodded her head, and the woman requested, "Call the store owner for me, please. Tell him that his mother is here." The store fell into absolute silence. Mike swallowed hard, his hands sweating cold. He knew this moment would be decisive. He was facing a situation that could end his career, his name in the industry, everything he had fought for. The young employee hurried to the phone to make the call, her hands trembling as she dialed the number. Meanwhile, the woman resumed walking around the store, examining the items, now completely ignoring Mike. To her, he seemed to no longer exist. She inspected every piece, as if assessing whether everything was in order. And Mike himself, the great manager who believed he was responsible for the store's standards, now seemed like just another misplaced piece. Then the door opened again. A well-dressed man with an air of sophistication and respect walked in. It was the store owner, James, the woman's son and Mike's boss. He walked with quick yet graceful steps, and his eyes scanned the room until they found his mother. "Mom, are you okay? Did something happen?" he asked, concerned, as he approached her. She smiled at her son, a warm and loving smile that showed how much he meant to her. "I'm fine, dear. I'm just here to handle a situation." Her eyes turned to Mike, and the store owner immediately sensed that something was very wrong. "What happened, Mom? Is there something wrong with the store?" She looked at Mike, then back at her son. "Actually, there's something very wrong, and it's standing right in front of us." James furrowed his brow, confused, then looked at Mike, who seemed on the verge of fainting from nerves. The tension in the air was unbearable, and all the employees watched the scene as if they were spectators of a dramatic play. "What did you do, Mike?" James asked firmly, now serious and staring directly at the manager. Mike tried to speak, but shame silenced him. He knew that anything he said now would be useless. James stared intently at Mike, his eyes full of fury and bewilderment. The presence of his mother in the store, especially under those circumstances, could only mean one thing. Something very serious had happened. The employees around stood frozen like statues, watching the intense scene, not wanting to miss a second of it. The woman stepped forward, approaching her son. She gently placed her hand on his arm, as if trying to calm him down, but her eyes remained fixed on Mike, who was shrinking further and further. "James, dear, this is Mike, the new manager you hired. He has a particular way of treating the store's customers." That statement carried an explosive tension. James narrowed his eyes, the anger and suspicion quickly growing. "Mike, can you explain to me what happened here?" His voice was cold as steel, and every word seemed to weigh a ton. Mike felt his mouth go dry, and the words seemed to slip away, like he was trying to speak with a knot in his throat. He knew the situation was critical and tried to come up with a quick but truthful explanation. "Mr. James, there was a misunderstanding. I thought that." Mike trailed off, looking desperately at the woman and then back to James, unsure of how to continue. The woman crossed her arms and slowly shook her head. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated. "You sent me away from the store, treated me like someone who didn't deserve to even look at the clothes here. And you did that because I was dressed simply. Isn't that right?" She gave Mike a direct look, daring him to deny the accusation. It wasn't my intention to offend you." Mike tried to defend himself, already knowing that his words would sound hollow. "I was just trying to maintain the standard. I had no idea that you were." James raised his hand, cutting Mike off mid-sentence. "Mike, are you saying that you judged my mother, the mother of this store's owner, based on how she was dressed? And then sent her away? Are you seriously trying to tell me that you thought it was right to humiliate a customer just because she didn't appear to have enough money to shop here?" With every word James said, Mike felt as though a heavier weight was being placed on his shoulders. He tried to stay firm, but his legs were weak, and he knew the floor could collapse beneath him at any moment. The tension was unbearable. I made a mistake. It was poor judgment. I realize that now. And I'm sorry." But the woman didn't seem even slightly moved by Mike's apology. Her gaze was serene, but at the same time full of a wisdom that only years of life can bring. She moved even closer to him, so close that Mike could smell her light perfume, something that completely contrasted with the intensity of the moment. "Poor judgment?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Mike, this is not just about poor judgment. This is about your arrogance, your prejudice. You looked at me, saw a simple woman, and decided that I didn't belong here. This goes much deeper than just a mistake." Her words hit him like direct blows. There was no escaping them. Everything he had done, every word, every gesture, was now being laid bare, and he stood naked before that truth. Shame burned on his face, and all he wanted was to disappear. James looked at his mother with the gentlest and most respectful expression possible. "Mom, I'm so sorry you went through this. You know how much I value respect and good treatment for all our customers. You more than anyone. I never imagined that something like this could happen in my store." She smiled at her son, a sincere smile, but with a trace of sadness. "I know, dear, and that's why I came here today, to show you that what's happening in your store isn't what you think. Because if Mike was able to treat a woman like me, someone he thought was too simple to be here, then maybe he's done the same to other customers as well. And you know how much that can damage your business." James nodded, clearly shaken and angry. He turned to Mike, who was now on the verge of despair. "You're fired. Right now. And if you're smart, you'll leave here without causing any more trouble." Mike's heart stopped for a moment. He knew this would probably be the outcome, but hearing James's final words felt like the final blow. Fired. No chance to explain himself, to redeem his error. And more than losing his job, he knew he would lose his reputation in the market. No one would hire a manager known for mistreating customers. I understand. I apologize. To both of you. It wasn't my intention." Mike tried to say, but he knew that nothing he said would change James's decision or the woman's opinion. "Leave, Mike, now," James ordered, his voice full of authority. Mike nodded silently, avoiding eye contact with anyone, and began to walk toward the door. With every step, he felt the stares of all the employees and customers on him, as if he were carrying the weight of all their criticism and judgment on his back. When he finally exited the store, the door closed behind him with a dull click, like the final closing of a chapter in his life. And inside, the woman looked at her son with a calm and satisfied expression. "Now, dear, why don't you show me the new collection? I'd like to do some shopping." Outside the store, Mike felt the cold New York wind cutting into his skin. Every step he took felt heavy, as if he were dragging chains. The constant noise of honking and hurried voices around him only emphasized his isolation. He, who had always thought of himself as being above everyone else, now felt like a nobody, a loser, fired and humiliated in front of everyone. His eyes were downcast, his face burning with shame, and his pride, once so inflated, was now in pieces. As he walked through the busy streets, the woman's words continued to echo in his mind. He couldn't forgive himself for what he'd done. The truth was, deep down, he knew he had acted poorly, and that this moment was inevitable. But realizing the depth of his mistake only made the pain worse. How could he have been so arrogant, so blind? And now, his entire career seemed to have crumbled in an instant. Who would hire a manager who had been publicly fired for mistreating customers? Mike wandered the streets, not knowing where to go or what to do. He stopped at a small cafe, shoved his hands in his pockets, and went inside, ordering a strong coffee to try to clear his head. He sat at a table in the corner, away from everyone's eyes, staring at the cup in front of him as his hands shook with nerves and anger. He could barely drink. The coffee cooled slowly, just like his hope. Meanwhile, inside the store, James was speaking to his mother, his voice still a bit heavy with frustration, but his tone respectful. "Mom, I'm really sorry you had to go through that. I don't know how I let someone like him join the team." She smiled at him, a smile full of love and understanding. "James, my son, this isn't your fault. There are people like Mike everywhere. What's important is that you handled it well. And now you can move forward and make sure that every customer, regardless of how they're dressed or where they come from, is treated with the same respect." James nodded, his expression calmer, though still shaken. He knew how wise and fair his mother was. Over the years, she had taught him the importance of treating everyone with dignity and never judging by appearances. That lesson, which he had tried to embed into his own business, had been tossed aside by someone like Mike, who didn't understand the essence of the store. And as James and his mother walked through the aisles, examining the clothes and discussing the future of the store, Mike remained seated in that little cafe, lost in his thoughts. The memory of the employees' judgmental looks haunted him, and he couldn't help but imagine how they were reacting now. Probably talking about his downfall, maybe laughing, or feeling relieved to be rid of the tyrannical manager. Mike's phone vibrated in his pocket, but he didn't have the courage to look at it. He knew it would be the official confirmation of his firing, or maybe messages from colleagues commenting on what had happened. He wasn't ready to face it. With a sigh, he ran his hands through his hair, feeling the cold sweat now dampening his forehead. For the first time in a long while, Mike felt helpless, like the ground had been ripped from beneath him, not knowing what to do next. After sitting there for some time, he decided to leave the cafe and head home. The walk back felt endless, and with every step, he felt the weight of what he had lost. When he finally got to his small apartment, he collapsed onto the couch and picked up his phone. And there it was, the message he dreaded the most. "Mike, your termination is officially confirmed. Your belongings will be sent to your residence, James." He read the message over and over, as if trying to find some loophole, something that suggested a second chance, but there was none. It was clear, direct, final. Mike was out. He thought about all the opportunities he had wasted, all the time and effort spent building a career that, in one single day, collapsed, his mind filled with images of the woman he had humiliated. Now, he knew she could buy any item in the store without even blinking at the price. And more than that, he knew she was someone who understood the true value of people, far beyond what they could purchase. Mike had never cared about the stories of the customers. To him, they were just numbers, faces that came and went, bringing money to the store. But now, that woman he had treated with such disdain had become the image of all his mistakes, his arrogance, and his lack of empathy. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the memory of that horrible day, but he couldn't. And for the first time in a long while, Mike began to cry. It was a mix of anger, shame, and regret. Regret for what he had done, for what he had become. The tears fell hot, and he made no effort to hold them back. Deep down in his heart, Mike knew he needed to change, that something had to be different. But how? And where to even begin? Mike sat there on the couch, staring at the ceiling as silent tears streamed down his face. He had been brought down by his own actions, by the arrogance he carried, and by the insensitive way he had treated someone who, at first glance, didn't fit his idea of a customer. It was a hard lesson to learn, but now he had no choice. He needed to reflect on who he was and what he had become. The hours passed slowly, and Mike felt like a prisoner of his own thoughts. Guilt was a constant companion. Every insult, every sarcastic comment he had made to coworkers or customers came back to his mind like knives stabbing him in the chest. He had never cared about others. To him, they were just pieces of a game that he needed to control to climb up in his career. But now, all his efforts to stand out and achieve success had been thrown away in a single act of contempt and rash judgment. Outside, night fell over New York. The city lights shone through Mike's window, but to him, everything seemed dull. He couldn't eat, and the silence of his apartment only amplified the feeling of isolation and failure. In an act of desperation, he picked up his phone and typed a message to James. "Please, forgive me. I know I acted badly, but I never thought this would happen. I can't lose this opportunity. I can change. I can do better." But after reading the words on the screen, he deleted everything. He knew that. Now, nothing he could say would change what he had done. That same night, he decided to go out for a walk, maybe to clear his mind, or simply to escape his own thoughts. He walked aimlessly, passing closed stores and crowded restaurants. On his way, he ended up in front of the store where he used to work, and as he looked through the window, he remembered every detail of that space that was now out of his reach. The inside was still lit up, and he could see James talking to some employees, including Sarah, who seemed to be listening attentively to what her boss was saying. He remembered how poorly he had treated Sarah, how he always underestimated her competence, dismissing her as just a salesperson. And now, there she was, standing beside the owner, listening attentively, being included in important decisions. Maybe she would be the next manager, Mike thought. And ironically, she would probably be far better than he ever was. Turning his gaze away, Mike continued his walk, feeling like the city, which once seemed full of opportunities and open doors, was now a maze of dead-end streets. What would he do now? Who would give a chance to someone who had been fired for treating a customer that way, especially when the customer was the store owner's mother? He walked for hours until, finally, exhausted, he stopped at a bench in a park. The cold New York night seeped into his bones, but he didn't care. There, alone and lost in his own thoughts, he realized something he had always ignored. How he judged people by what they wore, how they spoke, by the money they had, or that he assumed they had. How he had been cruel and insensitive, always trying to assert his power, his authority. Now that sense of power had completely vanished, and he felt only empty. That night, while he looked up at the sky covered in clouds and the distant stars barely visible, Mike made a decision. He knew he needed to change, and that change had to start from within. It wasn't just about saving his career or cleaning up his reputation. He needed to find a way to become a better person, someone who wasn't defined by pride and arrogance. The next day, after a sleepless night, Mike got up determined to take the first step. He went back to the store. This time, he didn't go inside. He didn't want to cause more problems or confront anyone. He stood outside, waiting for the right moment. When he finally saw Sarah coming out for her lunch break, he timidly approached her. "Sarah?" he called out, his voice lower and more humble than it had ever been. She turned, surprised to see him there. Her eyes showed a mix of distrust and curiosity. "Mike, what are you doing here?" she asked, crossing her arms as if preparing for whatever he might say. He took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything, for the way I treated you and everyone else here. I really messed up. There's no excuse for what I did, and I know that now. I just wanted you to know that I truly regret it." There was a sincerity in Mike's voice that Sarah had never heard before. She stayed silent for a few seconds, weighing what to say. "Look, Mike, I appreciate your apology, really, but you know, it's not just what you did yesterday. It was how you treated all of us, all the time, every day." Mike nodded slowly, her words weighing heavily on his shoulders. "I know, and you're right. I was a terrible coworker, a terrible manager, and honestly, I deserved what happened." Sarah's expression softened a bit. "I hope you can find a way to move forward, Mike. And who knows, become someone better." He gave a faint smile, something that felt strange on his tired face. "I'll try. I really will." Sarah nodded. "Good luck, Mike." And with those words, she walked away, heading back to the store, leaving Mike alone with his thoughts. As he watched Sarah enter the store and disappear among the clothes and mannequins, he felt that something had started to change within him. It was a slow, painful process, but a necessary one. The days passed slowly after Mike's humiliation. What had once been a routine of walking through the streets of New York as if he owned the city had now become a quiet journey of introspection. He began to observe the people around him differently, noticing small details, the way they smiled, the urgency in their steps, the worries written on their faces. Every person he passed, he asked himself, "What's this person's story? How did they get here?" For the first time, Mike began to understand something simple that he had ignored for so long. Everyone has a story, a value, and the clothes they wear or how they present themselves do not define who they are. Without a job and with no prospects, Mike began to look for work in smaller stores in an attempt to rebuild himself. However, the news of his firing spread quickly in the fashion and retail market. Everywhere he went, the response was the same. "Oh, you're Mike, the manager who mistreated the owner's mother. Sorry, but we can't hire you." Yet, instead of becoming bitter, he used those no's as a lesson. He understood that the change he was seeking wasn't external but internal. And each rejection was another opportunity for him to understand that what he had done wouldn't be erased by a simple apology. Much more would be needed to restore people's trust and respect. One day, while walking through the less busy streets of New York, Mike found a small clothing store, almost hidden between buildings. A simple store, with no flashy windows or bright signs, but it seemed to be run by someone with great care. There were clothes hanging on a rack outside, giving the place an almost homely feel. He hesitated for a moment, but something inside him urged him to go in. When he opened the door, a bell rang, and a gray-haired woman with a kind smile approached him. "Hello? Welcome. Can I help you with anything?" she said, her voice carrying genuine warmth. Mike gave a shy smile, something still new to him. "Actually, I'm looking for a job. I know it might seem strange to show up like this, but I was hoping to see if you're hiring." The woman looked him over carefully, noticing his humble posture, the way he kept his head slightly down. She nodded, asking him to sit down. "Well, it's not every day that someone comes in looking for work. But yes, I could use someone to help me in the store. I can't pay much, but—" "That doesn't matter," Mike interrupted with almost desperate urgency. "What I need right now is a chance. The pay doesn't matter. I just want to work." The woman, whose name was Margaret, smiled and motioned for him to follow her through the narrow aisles of the small shop. As they walked, she explained that the store had been in her family for generations and that she had run it on her own since her husband passed away. "It's hard work sometimes," she said, as she pointed to the shelves lined with neatly folded clothes and mannequins lovingly decorated, "but it's mine, and I love it here." Mike felt something warm up inside him. This store was the complete opposite of where he used to work. There were no luxurious displays, no exorbitant price tags, no extravagant customers. It was a calm, almost intimate environment where every piece of clothing seemed to have been handpicked. He felt out of place, as if that environment was too pure for the person he had been. But at the same time, it was exactly what he needed. "Margaret, I don't know how to say this, but I haven't been a very good person lately," he confessed. "I worked in a big store and did things I deeply regret. I judged people by what they wore, by their appearance, and that's why I lost my job." Margaret looked at him closely. Her eyes showed empathy, but also wisdom, as if she understood that no one is defined by their mistakes alone. "We all make mistakes, dear," she said in a gentle voice. "What matters is what you choose to do after making them. Are you willing to learn? To treat people as they deserve to be treated?" Mike nodded firmly. "I am, more than ever. I need this chance to prove to myself that I can change." She smiled. "Then let's give it a try." Margaret extended her hand to him, and they shook on it, sealing the deal. And so, Mike began working at that small shop, Monday through Saturday, helping Margaret fold clothes, serve customers, and take care of every detail. For the first time, he learned the value of listening to people's stories, treating each customer as someone special, not just a sales opportunity. Every smile he received in return, every thank you, was like a brick in rebuilding the person he wanted to become. In the beginning, it was difficult. With each customer who walked in, he still had the instinct to judge them by their appearance. But little by little, he re-educated himself. When an older man dressed in shabby clothes came in to buy a coat, Mike would smile, introduce himself, and say, "Welcome, sir. How can I help you today?" And if a woman with a child in her arms came in just to browse, he'd offer water, ask how they were doing, and let them freely explore the store. The days became lighter, and over time, Mike began to feel like part of that place, part of the new life he was building. And Margaret, always smiling and full of wisdom, guided him like a mentor, helping him find the humility and respect he had lost over the years. But even with everything going well, something still bothered him. He knew there was one person to whom he owed more than just an apology. And until he faced that, he would never be able to truly move on. After months working at Margaret's store, Mike felt like he had transformed. The simple routine of folding clothes, serving customers, and listening to stories brought a peace he had never known before. Every day, he rediscovered the value of small acts of kindness and empathy. But even with this new life, a part of his past still haunted him. The way he had treated James's mother, the owner of the store where he used to work. He knew he owed that woman a true, sincere apology. The woman he had humiliated out of sheer prejudice. But every time he thought about reaching out to her, his heart would race with fear. What if she rejected him? What if she didn't want to hear anything he had to say? Even so, he knew that to move forward and complete his journey of change, he had to find the courage to confront his past mistakes. One Saturday, At the end of the day, as he was closing up the store with Margaret, he finally decided. "I need to do something tomorrow," he said, with a seriousness that caught the older woman's attention. As always, she was understanding. "Whatever it is, Mike, I hope it brings you peace. You deserve it." The next day, dressed simply and without the glamour he once valued, Mike headed to the luxury clothing store on Fifth Avenue where he used to work. His plan was to talk to James and ask for the chance to apologize to his mother, to look her in the eyes and finally say the words he had held back for so long. When he reached the store, the same bell chimed as he opened the door. The atmosphere was as it always had been: elegant, luxurious, busy. But this time, he didn't feel that false power he once used to feel upon entering. He felt only humility. As he looked for James or someone familiar, he came across Sarah, the sales manager he had once treated with such arrogance. "Mike?" she asked. Surprised to see him there after so long, her eyes showed a mix of curiosity and concern. "What are you doing here?" Mike took a deep breath, trying to control his anxiety. I wanted to speak to James. I know I'm not welcome here, but I need to apologize to his mother. And to you too, of course." Sarah nodded slowly, assessing his sincerity, and then pointed to the office in the back. "James is in there. Go talk to him. But Mike, be honest, be sincere. He won't want to hear any empty apologies." Mike thanked her and, with slow steps, made his way to the office door. Each step felt like it weighed a ton, but he knew he couldn't turn back. He knocked softly on the door, and after a few seconds, he heard James's voice inviting him in. When he opened the door, he found the store owner sitting at his desk, surrounded by papers and spreadsheets. James's expression hardened as he saw who was standing before him. "Mike?" James said with evident surprise, but his face soon stiffened. "What are you doing here? I thought I'd never see you again." Mike bowed his head for a moment, struggling to find the right words. "I know this is the last place you'd want to see me, and I understand that. But I came here to apologize, James. A real apology. I'm not the same guy I was when I worked here." James crossed his arms, keeping his skeptical gaze. "An apology? Now? After everything that happened?" I know it seems like too little, too late," Mike continued, his voice trembling. "But these months away made me realize who I was, and I didn't like what I saw. I've been working in a small store since then, and I've learned a lot. I've seen how arrogant and unfair I was. I wanted to apologize to your mother in person, because what I did, I'm truly sorry." There was a long silence, and James continued to stare at him, as if trying to measure the sincerity behind the words. "My mother. She doesn't usually hold grudges," he finally said, "but I'm not sure if she'd want to talk to you." Mike nodded, understanding James's doubt. "I know, but please, if you can talk to her, give me a chance to make it right." James sighed, still uncertain, but he could tell that the man standing before him was not the same arrogant manager he'd fired months ago. There was a genuine humility and regret in his eyes. "I'll talk to her," James said at last. "If she agrees, I'll let you know." That night, Mike returned home feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. Now everything was in the hands of James's mother. All he could do was hope and pray that she'd be willing to hear him out. 2 days later, his phone rang. It was James. Mike answered immediately, and the voice on the other end was firm but not hostile. "Mike, my mother agreed to talk to you. She'll be at the store tomorrow at 10 a.m. I hope you know what to say." "Thank you, James. Thank you so much," Mike replied, relief and anxiety mixing in his voice. The next day, at exactly 10 a.m., Mike stood in the store. The door opened, and the woman walked in, as calm and serene as before. He approached her, nervous but determined to speak. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize. From the bottom of my heart, I was arrogant, cruel, and unfair. I treated you poorly because I thought your value was in the clothes you wore. And only now do I realize how wrong I was. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I have changed, or at least, I'm trying to." The woman looked at him in silence for a long time. Her eyes held no anger, but rather a serenity that Mike could never fully understand. Finally, she smiled, a gentle smile that seemed to ease the tension in the air. "Mike, we all make mistakes," she said in a calm voice, "and we all deserve a second chance if we're willing to learn from them. I'm glad you've learned. Believe me, forgiveness is something we give not just to others, but also to ourselves. Mike felt tears fill his eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. He hadn't expected to be forgiven, but those words freed him from a weight he had been carrying since that fateful day. "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much." And there, in that store where he had once fallen so low, Mike found the chance to start anew. Not as the arrogant manager he had once been, but as a humble man who finally understood that a person's value isn't in what they wear, but in what they carry inside. The end. Hey, are you enjoying this? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel.